Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and for existing Nutanix customers, thank you for your trust in us, and we hope to repay it many more times going forward. My name is Satish. I'm the Global Head of Design at Nutanix, and we are a team of roughly 40 people scattered across the globe between Bangalore, Berlin, and San Jose. So we are your ambassadors within Nutanix. We care deeply about your experience with Nutanix products, with Nutanix processes, everything associated with Nutanix. And we try to make it simple, easy, and frictionless. That's what we do day in and day out. So on the agenda, just simple stuff. What is experience design? And why is design relevant to Nutanix? We think design, is all about art or something like that, but I'd like to look at it from a business perspective, from a human-centric perspective. Why is design relevant? Why is it critical? And then, how do we design? What is it that we do? How do we do it? And how can you participate, actually? Right? So if we look at what is user experience design, Dheeraj, our CEO, says design is everything. Everything starts with design, and he means thoughtfully we have to craft things with the customer in mind first, right? And he talks about empathy and lack of friction, and that less is actually more. Keep it minimal, keep it simple, right? There are many definitions of design, and if you look at Steve Jobs, and of course no design deck is ever complete without a homage slide to Jobs, who has done a lot for design. And Steve talks about, design is how it works. It's not just the looks, it's not how it feels, it's actually how it works. So it's not the lipstick on the pig, as we say in the Bay Area. It's actually how the product works and helps you fulfill your needs, right? So while the definitions are many, in my mind it comes down to just very simple things. You have an intention, you want to accomplish something. Design is what gets you to get it done in the easiest, simplest manner with the most joy. Least amount of effort, most amount of joy. If we have managed that, we have achieved good design. It's as simple as that, right? So if you look at who these guys are, there's the starving artiste, for example, who is a designer. There's the conception of that. There are designers are people that wear black. For example, they have a peculiar affection for the color black. But these people are actually extremely well educated. It's a multidisciplinary field. There is, components of it include behavioral psychology, interaction design, visual design, cognitive science, and people get bachelor's, master's, PhDs in this field. And typically it's a master's in human-computer interaction, or a PhD in design itself. Sometimes it's called with many names. So basically there are people extremely sophisticated in the art of understanding how people interact with products and the world around them, right? So if you look at what are the qualities of a designer, basically the key one is empathy. We have to be able to sit in a customer's shoes and understand the world, see the world from the way they are seeing it, so we can actually solve for their problems. And of course, you need good communication, collaboration, all those things, right? So that's roughly what design is and what designers do. And so why is it critical to Nutanix? Why is it so important for us? Why do we make such a big deal about it, right? So let's look at the industry, right? For the past 20 plus years, the cost of CPUs, for example, has been declining roughly a third year over year. Storage is much worse, 38% year over year, right? Networking, roughly around the same. And that is very obvious to us in our everyday lives, because the phones that you hold in your hand have a lot more computing power than many of the big computers that were made 20, 30 years ago, right? So my point is technology essentially has been becoming cheaper and cheaper, getting more and more commoditized. And if we look at the scale with which technology is getting deployed, I stopped measuring things in square feet or square meters because the numbers got really big, so I started doing soccer fields. So this is Microsoft data center in San Antonio, 6 soccer fields wide. This is Google. In Mays County, Oklahoma, they took an old Gatorade plant and converted it into a data center, 15 soccer fields wide. So technology has become ubiquitous. It's become commodity, extremely cheap, and at very, very large scale. And this is obvious in many of your own experiences, because people, customers that we have from big companies have extremely big data centers, right? And when things become cheap, ubiquitous, and get deployed at very large scale, what happens? And we have seen this in the mobile phone industry. On the left is the Dynatac. It weighed 1.5 kilograms roughly, took 10 hours to charge for 30 minutes of talk time, and cost around $4,000 in 1983. And of course, you can also use it as a weapon if you need to, right? So, but at that point in time, it was a big deal because technology was king. It allowed you to move around and speak. It's a big deal. But the user experience was really, really bad, but nobody really minded it. Everybody would allowed to have one because it was new technology, right? And then came the IBM Simon and the BlackBerry, and then many generations of the iPhone. And technology proceeded to recede into the background. Technology became a platform. None of us wake up in the morning and get all excited saying, my iPhone has 64 gigabytes of memory and it has 8 cores or something like that, right? We don't do that. The reason we use a phone is basically we are able to customize it, and it helps us live our lives a little more easier, right? So technology fades into the background and is no longer the big deal. But what really surfaces as the true value proposition is the user experience. And that is the learning that we've had from watching the mobile phone industry evolve, right? And then if we look at the current design of the data centers, the stack that many of you are familiar with, it is a whole bunch of products, different silos. There's a virtualization silo, there is a storage silo, there's a networking silo, right? Different teams, different products from different vendors, different compatibility requirements, different restrictions, right? Different user experiences, different constructs. Extremely hard to set up and manage, especially at scale. Especially at scale, right? And then when I talk to customers, they tell me in such an architecture, it takes them weeks to deploy an application. And when troubleshooting needs to happen, then many teams have to talk to each other, and they don't really speak a common language. The networking guy doesn't really know how to talk to a storage guy because they're completely different technologies and they don't have expertise. You've lived this day in and day out, right? So this is the current design that we have. And at scale, the problem starts getting much worse. So then that begs the question, so wait, why did this happen? And the reason that it happened was technology, in a sense, evolved horizontally. CPUs became smaller, cheaper, faster. Storage became more for less money and faster. Networking, faster, lower cost. Technology continued to evolve horizontally to get better and better and better, but the consumption actually happens vertically. Applications, human beings consume technology vertically. They need a slice of the entire stack, and nobody has really been looking at this problem in the past 20, 30 years. The problem of consumption. How do we consume technology as humans, as applications, as API developers, as DevOps people? How do we consume technology? And that is where the real action lies, and that's the real problem to be solved, according to us, right? So then if you ask the question, what is the most expensive thing in the data center now that technology is cheap? It's human time. And increasingly, as you know, the speed of business is governed by the speed of IT. If you have to run a marketing campaign and you have a small window, you can't be taking weeks to deploy an app that will give you business insights about the marketing campaign. It just is not possible. The window would have disappeared by the time. So the speed of business increasingly becomes the speed of IT. And so basically the problem has moved from being tech-centric to being human-centric. And when I say human-centric, I mean consumption-centric. How do we consume technology? Our expectations have moved. In the old days, you would go with a printed ticket and have it validated to get on a flight. These days we swipe and we fly, right? And for the new generation of digital natives, that grew up in the era of the web, in the era of the phone, for them, it just will not do. Bad experiences just will not do. For many of us as well, when we go home in our personal lives, we find beautiful applications that we use that are very easy, frictionless. And then when we come to work, if things don't look the same and as easy and as beautiful, we ask ourselves the question, why is it this way? So our expectations have moved. And in fact, in China, even beggars have realized that, great user experience matters. So they have QR codes. And so you just scan the QR code instead of fumbling for change in your pocket. And with Alipay or something like that, they get paid, right? So everybody realizes the value of good user experience. The spend has moved. Roughly 18% of IT spend is CapEx these days. It's moved from CapEx to OpEx. And so if I were to summarize, basically what has happened over the years is technology has become cheap, ubiquitous, the spend has moved to being more OpEx, human time has become the most valuable thing in the data center, our expectations have moved. So we have really no other choice but to build everything from a human-centric viewpoint. So we have to understand what is the experience we want to create and then build technology to support it, and not the other way around. In a place where there's new technology, you can build new technology and you can say, well, you know what, this technology is cool. And even if it has a bad user experience, like that big phone that we saw, you can get by. But in the world that we live in right now, everything built has to emerge from human centricity. So what does that mean, really? It means understanding your needs, your constraints, your time, and your environment in great depth, and building products to fulfill that need, not as features, but as experiences that truly support your life. It's a different way, really, of thinking about product, right? So, and in a way, that was the motivation for us to set up a design and development center in Berlin, so we can understand the needs of our European customers and serve them better. So we have a small design and development center set up now, roughly around 15, 20 people, and we're continuing to grow the team so we can serve you all better, right? And how do we design? So, how does this come about? There's really no magic in how we design. It's quite simple. And so if you look at it, it's a standard flow. And the first phase is basically we try to understand what is your need. So we do a lot of what we call experience research, talking to customers, asking them a lot of questions, trying to understand, what is it that they want and why. So let me give you an example. If I were to say, or if you were to say, look, I need your car keys and some money, I could give you the car keys and the money, or I could ask you why. And then you would probably tell me, well, I need to go to the supermarket to buy some milk. And then I would say, why? Then you would say, well, you know what, I want to make a cup of coffee. So if I knew that you really wanted a cup of coffee, I could have given you the coffee instead of keys and some money and probably a map and say, go ahead and, make a cup of coffee. So in user research, we basically walk what we call the line of whys, why, till we understand what is the original need, what is the original intent, as opposed to the perceived need. The perceived need in this case is keys and some money. The original need is actually the coffee, right? So it's very important, therefore, for us to engage with our customers to understand the real needs. And then once we do that, we go broad in the process. We what we call, diverge, and then then we converge, and when we have a clear idea of what the needs are. And then once we do that, then we actually can participate in a process called co-creation, wherein we sit down with customers and actually ideate on what possible solutions could be. Would this work? Would this other thing work? So we go through a lot of ideation, and then we consolidate those. So in all of these phases, as you can see, we diverge, and then we bring it together, we converge. So we consolidate that stuff into a few key ideas, right? And those ideas, basically, we move into concepts, into prototypes, and those we put in front of customers, and we test it out to see if it actually works. And that is the process of user testing. You might have seen some of these at the various new experience labs that we conduct at .next. Some of you may have been on calls with us where we put together prototypes for you to look at on WebEx or something and ask you for feedback. So to summarize, there are 3 places where we would love to collaborate more with you. One is the process of identification, which is all the user research. The second is the process of ideation, where we co-create, we come up with ideas. And then the third one is, of course, usability testing, right? Where we figure out, build concepts and see if it really works, if it's as frictionless as we thought it would be. And once that is done, then we go ahead and start writing code to build product, right? And then we develop, where we, concepts into solutions, and then we release it into the world. And then we iterate again, because we get feedback from the usage, and then we come back and then we refine it. So this is overall the design process that we have. And then if you ask the question, look, fine, do you have design principles that all Nutanix products follow? We do have. We have 3 design principles. The first one is called intentional design, which is you should be able to express your intent, and we should be able to satisfy that intent. Imagine a world, for example, if Google did not exist, and you had lists and lists of websites. Your intention might be to say, okay, what's the weather in Paris? But then you would have to go to a website, find the website first of all, figure out which bucket of websites should I look for to find that website, or remember all of them, and then go and type in something, and you would get your answer. Or Uber, for example, that's a great example of intentional design, wherein you just type in your location that you want to go to, and more or less everything else happens from that point on. Your ride arrives, you get in, payment happens, etc., etc. That is good intentional design. The second one is called opinionated, meaning we have an opinion, we have a clear opinion about what a good user experience is. What is the 80% use case? What is the 20% use case? How critical is the use case, or how critical are the use cases that we are solving for, right? So we have a clear opinion about what good design should be. It's very easy to say, well, I'll give you all the options, I'll give you all the bells and whistles, and say, well, you know what, I have given everything, now the user can do everything. Except that doing everything takes a lot of pain on behalf of the user, right? So that is really not good design. So that's like going to a grocery store, like a supermarket, and looking at all the choice that you have when you're trying to buy a box of breakfast cereal. You will see, high protein, low calorie, made of wheat, gluten-free, this, that, and the other thing. There are tons of choices, and then you get overwhelmed with choice. And that's really not great design. That is called the tyranny of choice, right? So opinionated basically means minimal, simple, to the point, frictionless, very thoughtfully crafted, right? And the third one is delightful. And by delightful, I don't mean, something that looks pretty or like a bouquet of roses or some such thing that you get where you suddenly feel happy. Delightful is being able to anticipate your need before you've had a chance to express it and solving for it. So the best example I can give you for that is, look, you're trying to move a workload, an application from one cluster to another cluster. So we can say, well, you know what, I'll give you a list of clusters ranked in order of where you should move. And you pick one, and you say move, and then the workload moves. It's all good, right? At that point in time, we can say it's good design, it's done. Because we gave you a ranked order of clusters, you hit a button, it's done. So you go ahead and you click, move. And then the workload starts to move, and it moves. At that point in time, anybody, any human being will still have some anxiety in their mind. Well, I moved a workload. Is it working well? Is it performing well? What about other workloads on that cluster? Are they all okay? Because now there's more load on that cluster, right? And typically they would go back, look at the new cluster, look at the application performance a bunch of times, over the next day or two or something, and then convince themselves that everything is okay. Imagine if the system, once you hit move, turned around and said, look, I'm going to monitor the performance of the application that you moved. I'm also going to monitor the performance of other applications that were there on the cluster. And if there is like a 10% or something variation, I will actually alert you or text you or something like that. Wouldn't that be nice? Because the user really has some anxiety that they have not expressed, but the system actually has responded to that, right? So that is where the equation actually reverses, where instead of the human being watching over the machine actually starts looking out for the human being. And then people start feeling like they are cared for, that the product actually works for them. And that, in my mind, is true delight, right? So in closing, basically, all I'll say is, let's collaborate to create. Let's collaborate to create. So we create, beautiful products together that truly work for you. And that's all I have to say. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.